Okay, so last week, we Angie did a review of Psalms, and she printed out a really neat handout, and we have copies of these that we can give, because in our class, what we do is, we'll start out with, we decided we want to say the Psalms, but we also want to say this other thing. So we decided to incorporate the Psalms, a psalm in as a part of the class every day. So last week, Angie did a review of the Psalms, and we also record the classes. So you can go back, if you missed the class, you can go and watch a recording of it, that type of thing. So anyway, she did an overview of the Psalms, and this is the handout. So we have one of these. If you want one, we have them over here. And then she proceeded to read Psalm number 1. Okay. And so with Psalm number 1, well, for one thing, I have a question. Which Old Testament book has the most chapters?
Probably Psalms.
Psalms.
Yeah, 100, yeah.
I think I gave that away. I should have said that first.
Yeah. And number 151 is in the Apocrypha.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Number 150. In the Apocrypha, there's one more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then okay.
Is it really different than the others?
I don't think
It
so.
didn't pass
It's been a while since we
muster
did
to-
the Apocrypha.
We don't remember why.
We'll have to go and take.
But Sarah remembered that it was in there when you said it. I was like, yeah.
So in the very beginning of the Psalms, there are 2 chapters that are basically an introduction. Okay, Psalms 1 and 2 are just an introduction. And so they lay out the main theme of the whole book of Psalms. And she mentioned there were 5 sections of the Psalms, etc. last week. So Psalm number 1 was looking back to the Garden of Eden and the river of life, and God placed humanity in the garden. But what did humans do? They decided they wanted to define good and evil, that type of thing. And so what Psalm number 1 kind of concentrated on or introduced was the idea of the Torah. Okay, that I think it was like, the person who is righteous reads and meditates on the Torah, all the time. Okay. And so it's kind of remembering back into God's promise, though, that even though there are wicked and we have been exiled from the garden, that there is hope for the future. And so Psalm number 2 kind of introduces that God's promise, okay, of a king. So in Psalms 1 and 2, they're introducing all the main themes of the Psalms themselves. And so you're introduced to the temple and the Torah. And then in Psalm number 2, we're going to be introduced to the Messiah and the kingdom of God. And so Psalm number 2 is kind of reflections of 2 Samuel 7, where it's the covenant. God sets up the covenant with God, or God sets up the covenant with David with regard to the Messiah and the kingdom of God. So does someone want to read Psalm number 2? Does anyone have it out?
I can do that.
Okay.
Why do the nations conspire and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and his anointed, saying, let us burst their bonds asunder and cast their cords from us. He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord has them in derision. Then he will speak to them in his wrath and terrify them in his fury, saying, I have set my kings on Zion, my holy hill. I will tell of the decree of the Lord. He said to me, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage, and the ends of the earth your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron and dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Now therefore, O kings, be wise, be warned, O rulers of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear, with trembling, kiss his feet, or he will be angry, and you will perish in the way, for his wrath is quickly kindled. Happy are all who take refuge in him.
Kiss his feet. Is that what it said?
Yep,
Yeah,
yep, in verse 11.
yeah, that's his feet.
In the
He'll be angry at you.
In the NIV, it says kiss his son,
Oh, interesting.
Okay.
or he will be angry and your way will lead to your destruction.
So made up. It don't matter.
But anyway, so these first two Psalms are supposed to introduce the entire story. And this one is supposed to be introducing the Messiah. Or
When
God's
it
son.
says you are in verse 7, when he says, he said to me, you are my son.
You are my son. Today I have become your father is what my version said.
Yeah, today I've begotten you.
Mhm. Yeah. So when Kathy shared a meme with us last week.
Yeah, I like it.
Do you remember it?
Yeah, what was it, 2,000 years from now?
Nancy, welcome.
Good
morning.
Good morning.
2,000 years from now, people will be trying to tell the difference between butt dial and booty call.
And
That's why the Bible is so hard to understand.
Yeah. So when I read this, and I think about what I'm supposed to be seeing here, I don't know that I see that there.
No,
You
Right.
know,
I don't know that I do either.
yeah.
no, and they say that, you said Psalm 2 was about the Messiah. I definitely have
Mhm.
not seen that. I've
It's supposed to
seen-
be a reflection on 2 Samuel where David is promised, that his line will.
That there are some theologian interpreters that
Mhm,
say that,
mhm,
but not all do.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. So we have all kinds of interpretations, of the song.
To me, it just sounds like sort of the Old Testament, God of wrath and, if you obey me, I will give you dominion over other peoples and nations. If you don't obey me, you're gonna be broken
I'm
like.
gonna give them
bits of
dominion over you.
Pottery,
Yeah.
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 I don't see the Messiah.
It's just another example of humanity trying to create God in their image.
So over the years, we have gone through, and I think that our last series of study was called studying all the other books of the Bible. And so we kind of
The New
finished
New
that.
Testament.
And the New
Not
Testament.
New Testament, of the New Testament. And so I think we have studied the Old Testament a little bit in the past.
Yeah,
With
because we
the-
did
with the-
Genesis.
And the
We
minor
did
prophet,
the minor prophets, and we did Daniel last year.
Right,
Daniel.
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh. I don't remember.
Well.
So Janie, this is a theme.
It's all right.
Well, when we redid a book, because we all had forgotten we did it the first time.
Daniel, if I remember correctly, is a small.
Right, but we spent months on it.
Yeah, back 20 years ago, when we had to, before this building was built and we were in the fellowship hall, we were doing the Gospel of John. And one day we spent the whole hour on 3 verses.
Well, it took us 17 months to do the book of John, so.
But who's counting?
But, it's when we finish it.
It's a rich discussion and study. So I
Well,
don't say that to
sometimes-
intimidate anybody, it's just the process that we go through. We have a rich, diverse discussion about a lot of whatever it is we're doing.
Well, sometimes there are 4 of us who share teaching the class. And so we sometimes say, all you really have to do to plan is come in with 1 or 2 sentences, and then the class will take over,
Yeah.
from there.
Oh,
So,
So welcome to this group.
Yes. As long as there's a bus driver.
Good point, good point.
so, so we're going to start studying Isaiah. We chose Isaiah primarily when we were discussing, where do we go next? Is this, let's look at the Old Testament. And they said, well, what book in the Old Testament is referred to most or more in the New Testament? Since we just finished studying all the books of the New Testament. And Isaiah came to mind. And so that's the one that we decided, and that's how we made that decision to study that. So Isaiah is in the Old Testament. Okay. And I remember long ago, and I might have who quoted it, who said this wrong, but I always think of Paul Simmerall, our associate minister from long ago, had a member of his congregation, not his congregation,
Yeah.
but a
His-
member of his
His
congregation.
congregation when he was in seminary, if you're about to say what I think you're going to.
I'm not sure. I thought it was an older person.
Well, it is, but I mean, when you're in.
Oh, when he was a student.
When Paul was a student in seminary, the seminaries, back when they actually went to campus and lived there for 3 years,
Mhm.
they spent Sunday being ministers to these little bitty country churches that only had 10 or 15
Right.
people. And I think that's where this.
I think you're
Yeah.
right. Anyway, a member of his congregation, quote, told him or commented that if the King James Bible was good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for me.
That's hilarious.
And he said he was so taken aback by the whole, that he just let it go. He said he had no idea how to reply to that, but she was serious, she meant it, and just. And my mother, even though the comment wasn't that bad, my mother had a different Bible from the King James when she was in Sunday school 20, 30, 40 years ago. And she was severely reprimanded. Because the King James Version was the Bible.
Mhm. Well, it sounds holy with all the these and thous and
Yeah.
those and that kind of thing, sounds holy. So anyway, so I think that kind of answers the question about why isn't the Hebrew scripture called the Old Testament?
It's the only test.
Right, they didn't have a New Testament, they don't have a New Testament. So Jesus's Bible didn't have a New Testament.
Yeah.
Okay, he was the New Testament coming.
And their scriptures were not canonized into a single body until, help me out, Harold,
I found it,
about 200, I mean,
324,
Hebrew Bible was
324, Nicene Conference,
I'm not, that's the
No.
New Testament, I'm talking the
Oh.
Hebrew Bible.
400 years, about 400 years, I think, BC. As
It's
far
just-
as written anyway.
The
Well, I mean, it
Hebrew
was-
Bible was canonized or deemed to be holy in scripture early in the Common Era.
Okay, that's what I was
Some
thinking.
say this occurred at the Rabbinic Council of Jamna,
Mhm.
around 90 CE, but other sources say it's intact before that time.
Yeah.
Okay, so,
So it sounds like it was a
but it's,
process over a
Right.
period of time.
Well, the same way the New
years and-
Testament was.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
so the Old Testament. Gonna start this class off with really trying to talk a little bit about the Old Testament that Isaiah is a part of.
Okay.
So it's really, really, really old. It's been around a long time. And the earliest known manuscripts are over 1,000 years old. The Leningrad Codex and cover events that occurred thousands of years ago. It says it's referred to in ancient Jewish texts like the Dead Sea Scrolls and other wisdom books and wisdom writings. And in Luke 24:44, even Jesus refers to it saying, he said to them, this is what I told you while I was still with you. Everything must be fulfilled that is written about me in the law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms. Okay, so the author of the book that we're going to be using for our guide had mentioned that he doesn't really like calling it the Old Testament. He says that assumes that it's antiquated or out of date or whatever. He likes to call it the First Testament. Okay. And of God to the people. So in ancient Jewish tradition, their Bible, okay, so think about the lady at Paul's church, their Bible was on separate scrolls, and it was like a 3-part collection. So when you think of Jesus, when he said the law of Moses, okay, that was the Torah,
Right.
and that's the first 5 chapters.
5 books.
5 books, I'm sorry, 5 books.
Mhm.
Okay. And then we have Jesus said, law of Moses, the prophets.
Yeah, that's, remember I told you I've got the Hebrew scriptures in 3 volumes? This is the prophets.
That's just the
This
prophets.
is just the prophets,
Okay.
with lots of footnotes.
The
I mean, the
prophets,
footnotes big time.
okay. And then the 3rd section, which includes the Psalms, is called the writings. Okay, and so it consists of a bunch of different scrolls, but they're grouped. So we have the whole thing we have the Torah, then we have the prophets, which is called the Nevi'im,
That's the Hebrew word.
Hebrew word. Nevi'im, which is means the prophets.
Yeah, this is what it looks like.
Oh,
Okay, and then we have the writings, which is called the Ketuvim,
okay.
Ketubim. Okay, and so their whole Bible, what we call the Old Testament in Protestant, okay, is called the Tanakh. It's TA for Torah, NA for the Nevi'im, and KH or K for the Ketuvim. Okay, so it's the Tanakh. So when we have the Tanakh and we have our Old Testament.
And what that means too is that it's arranged that way. Our Bible, I mean, we've got the Torah as 5 consecutive books, but then the writings and the prophets are interspersed in our Bibles. So the order is different.
That's right, a Hebrew Bible.
And we're gonna go, and I'm gonna go over that. We'll just take a quick look at that. Okay,
So when, just so I'm straight on this, the Torah is the first 5 books.
mhm,
And if I were to go to a synagogue this week, they would have the entire, what we consider the entire Old Testament, or just what would be in their pews? Like, what would
If
their,
they had pew Bibles.
yes, if they have,
Yeah.
and they actually do, because I've been to a synagogue
Okay.
that had them.
So the
yeah.
order would just be different?
we're gonna take a look at that.
Okay, oh, cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
So with the Torah, you have the first 5 chapters. And if you look at the Old Testament, the Protestant, which is 39 books, oh shit, let me get over here. The Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh, is 24 books.
Oh, okay.
It all has the same information in it, basically. It's just one's 24, and some of them are combined. Okay. So we've got down below in the bottom of this chart where it has the Old Testament Protestant 39 books, and I hear the Catholics have 46.
Yeah, because there's some books they include that the Protestant Bible has in the Apocrypha.
Yeah, but what I did was for each of the 4 sections in our Protestant Bible, or the way that they're organized, and in the Old Testament, they're kind of organized into categories by subject. Okay, in the Tanakh, they're kind of organized, as you can start seeing, they're organized chronologically.
Mm,
Okay.
okay.
But I put down the books of the Bible in the Old Testament, and then to the side, I put which section they are in the Tanakh.
Oh, gotcha.
Okay,
Okay.
so you can kind of see, how that's organized there. But so the Protestant Old Testament has 39 books. They're in the same order as it's in the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh. Okay, the Hebrew Bible has the 24 books, and they're organized in the order of the status of the authors, with Moses first, the early prophets next, and so on. Okay. And then the 2 canons, they tell, even though it's the same information, they're kind of telling different stories. The Old and the New Testament focus on salvation at the end time with the book of Revelation, and show the rectification of the fall of Eden, and the Tanakh speaks of returning to a homeland. Okay, in the end. So they've been through exiles and returned to the homeland. So we start out with the first 5 books, the Ta in the word Tanakh, and then the Genesis, meaning in the beginning, Exodus meaning names, and they give the Hebrew word for each of these. Leviticus he called, Numbers in the wilderness, and Deuteronomy are meaning.
Ah. Nice.
And I'll get this up on the website so that you have the resources.
I thought y'all should see what we're looking at.
That would be nice.
I don't think.
Are you gonna have that matted for us for next week?
Not until Angie comes back, because she has resources. You said. So we have the in the Protestant group, we have like the we start off with the Torah, and then we have the Nevi'im, and then we have the Ketuvim. But in the Protestant version, we have the the book of laws are called the Pentateuch. The Pentateuch.
That's the Greek for Torah. Yeah.
Right. And then we have historical books, and there are 12 of them. And some of these books are in the prophets, or are in the writings. And then we have the wisdom books in the Old Testament, and then we have the prophecy books in the Old Testament. And then we have in our Old Testament, we have a separate book for each of the minor prophets, but in the Tanakh, it's all in one book, and it's called the
That
12.
explains the difference in the
Oh.
books.
Okay, I just thought you were consolidating there when you said
No.
the 12. That
They
is-
consolidated them.
They
yeah,
consolidate.
Interesting.
Okay, and they also consolidate Kings. We have a 1st and 2nd Samuel, we have a 1st and 2nd Kings, we have a 1st and 2nd Chronicles, and they consolidate those. And we also have Ezra and Nehemiah, and they consolidate those two into one.
Okay.
Interesting.
So just, a little bit about what Jesus was studying. And then we have in Isaiah for Everyone, he talks about and gives kind of a timeline for the Old Testament. And so I have some handouts of that too, that I'll put up on the website for you guys.
Thank you.
They're all gonna hold it up to the screen while this guy.
Well, mainly I was going to mention, yeah, you can show it. That, in the 1200s, we have Moses and the Exodus, in the 1100s, the Judges, the 1000s, King Saul and King David, 900s, King Solomon, 800s, Elijah and Elisha. Then we have 700s, we have Amos, Hosea, Isaiah, Micah, and that's when Assyria becomes the superpower. In the 600s, Babylon becomes the superpower, and we have Jeremiah. 500s, Ezekiel, and that's the fall of Judah, and Persia becomes the superpower, and the Jewish people are free to go home. And then 400s, Nehemiah, Ezra. In 300s, Greece becomes a superpower. 200s, Syria and Egypt. Regional powers pulling Judah one way or the other, he says. 100s, Judah's rebellion against Syrian power and the gain of independence, and in the zeros is Rome becomes the superpower. So just a little idea, and then in this whole thing, we see that we've got Isaiah in that 800, I think it was.
Yeah.
800s and 700s, 800s, that type of thing. Okay, so that's where we are when we're studying Isaiah.
How much? Now, you've got here that there's 400 years of silence, but in the Apocrypha, am I getting ahead of you?
No, you can
Okay,
spill out your knowledge.
the Maccabees, how many were there? 4 or 5? I thought it was at
the
least
book
4.
Maccabees?
Yeah, then there was 4 Maccabees.
Yeah.
That's part of that 400 years of silence. That was it.
Okay,
I'm sorry, why was it the Maccabees, why were they silent?
No, the
no, they're
Maccabees,
not silent, it's just that during the 400 years of silence,
in terms of scriptures,
right,
there were no Hebrew scriptures being written. The Christian scriptures weren't being written yet.
Okay.
But some of the books that are in the Apocrypha were being written in that 400-year period.
So
And
it's not like we don't have anything from that time
Yeah.
period. They're just,
They're just in the Apocrypha, not in.
Right.
and part of what I remember was the Maccabees, because that was part of the revolt against one of those political.
there was all that political stuff going on.
Yeah.
And the Jews were kind of divided. weren't
Yeah,
they? Yeah,
yeah.
they weren't all on the same side
Yeah, in fact,
during that time.
they invited Rome in
Right.
to help fight off Syria. Somebody. And that decision came back to bite them in the butt later on.
I remember
I
that.
think they were afraid of the Assyrians, I think, wasn't it?
I think so.
Okay.
And they invited Rome in and Rome stayed.
Mhm.
That was, Maccabean, the last revolt was around 160 BC, wasn't it? And that's about 154 is when they invited the Romans in or something along those lines.
That sounds about right. Okay.
okay. So that brings us to Isaiah, okay? And couple of, I had these little trivia cards that we played when we were having lunch together to try to figure out what we were gonna study this year. And, just before we get into Isaiah, how many books of the Old Testament have only one chapter?
Obadiah.
Oh, you're hurting my brain.
Isn't it just?
Oh, this is
Obadiah?
new, I think this is new. Tell me the New Testament, how
Oh,
many?
Well, Philemon that we just did.
Right,
first, second, and third John. No,
second and third John.
second and third John, Titus.
And the tiny one,
Jude.
Jude, right.
Wow.
I'm impressed.
I was
It's my
amazed,
Southern
I
Baptist.
was amazed at how many questions Kathy and Sarah and Angie could answer. I couldn't answer any of them.
Hey, it's my Southern Baptist upbringing. You know, the Bible drills on Sunday night paid off.
Hey, church camp, we had Bible drills at church camp.
Yeah.
And which Old Testament prophet said, "Here I am, send me"?
Samuel.
That
No.
Samuel wasn't a prophet.
No, but it was in the book of Samuel.
What are we gonna get ready to study?
Isaiah.
Isaiah.
Oh, it's in Isaiah?
Mhm.
Oh,
Boy, I was remembering the wrong thing.
okay.
So Isaiah was the prophet who said that.
So that's something when we get. to
They
that,
probably
we'll
all
go
did.
Yeah.
Isaiah is the first of the great prophetic books, it says. But then let me take a look at this little. Not the former, but the latter in the Bible.
Oh, he's one of the latter prophets.
He's one of the latter prophets in the Tanakh.
Okay.
He's one of the major prophets, in the Old Testament.
He was or they were?
You talking about Isaiah, Harold, as far as
Yes.
whether
Yeah,
Isaiah's one person or three people
Right. It could be,
or a bunch of people? We don't know.
it could be.
Hmm.
Right. And as a resource, if you're interested in taking a look at a few little videos in the Bible Project, mentioned a lot, there are two little videos on Isaiah 1 through 39 and another one 40 through 66. And there's also an Old Testament overview there that you can look at. Really nice little summary videos. But who wrote the book of Isaiah? That's the next question that you're all kind of answering here. That many Jewish and Christian traditions hold that he wrote the entire thing. Okay. and Sarah goes, "Bleh." And other groups ascribe that the first 39 chapters were Isaiah, and then the chapters 40 through 66 were disciples or people who built on Isaiah's vision.
he'd have to have gotten pretty old, over 60 years of writing to be one guy.
Right, because the perspective of the last chapters were things that happened after Isaiah had been dead for 150 years or so long, so they're thinking that there are a couple of different ideas, well, not just a couple, there are probably thousands of different ideas. The context, where and when was it written?
Well, if I look at the timeline.
He lived in Jerusalem during the latter half of Israel's kingdom period. Okay. It says Isaiah does his prophetic work in Judah under kings Uzziah,
Uzziah.
Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah.
Hezekiah.
Okay, during the period before and during the Babylonian exile, 586 through 539.
It seemed to me I sat down and read the first 14 chapters this morning, and it seemed to me, number one, that there's a whole lot of Isaiah quoted in our church services, particularly around Christmas. And number
Right.
two, that it seemed to be written in a time of moral decline in Israel.
Yeah. And that's why what a prophet's job is, you know, that he spoke to the leaders of Jerusalem and Judea, warning them about God's judgment and telling Israel's about their corrupt leaders and that they were rebelling against the covenant of God and oppressing the poor. Okay. So I think that.
Well, there was one other theme that came through, I thought pretty strong, which, well, it's kind of an important theme, how he was saying God does not want all of these sacrifices and sick of the sacrifices and the stench and da. That's kind of an important theme when we go way forward and into maybe transfiguration, when Jesus says the same thing, when they want to set up a little, whatever. And then we have turned that around and turned Jesus into a sacrifice. I mean, think about it. And they're in direct opposition. Isaiah, Jesus, and then the current Jesus was a sacrifice.
Yeah, I knew you'd bring that up.
Do I? What'd you say? I missed it.
Said I knew that you would bring that up.
Oh, yeah, okay. Well, somebody, it's a dirty job, but somebody's got to do it.
No, it's a good point, Carol. It's a point well made.
Yeah, and I remember reading somewhere that the Christian idea of Jesus being a substitute for us as a sacrifice only dates back about 1,000 years. That idea
Right.
was not in the original church.
Yeah, it's made up.
But it was in the pseudo letters of Paul, because that's why you all remember, I used to always say, I don't like Paul, because his theology was not that of Christ.
Right.
And then we studied Paul, and I realized it was only in the pseudo epistles that it talked about that. So it does go back, into the first century, I think, as far as this substitution idea.
Yeah, late first and going into the second century. Right.
So he was basically saying that God is going to use great empires of Assyria and then Babylon to judge Jerusalem. And if they persisted in idolatry and oppression, that's what was going to happen. And that's what's going to happen anyway, because they know what the people are going to be doing. But he said it also has a kind of a message of hope, because Isaiah did believe that God would one day fulfill his covenant promise. Okay. That he would send a king from David's line to establish his kingdom on earth, that he would lead Israel in obedience to all the laws of the covenant made on Mount Sinai. So there was some hope in there. What about the literary style of?
Very poetic, beautiful language.
So poetic, prophetic, apocalyptic. Is that in there?
As far as what's going to happen in the world if you don't change your ways.
Yeah.
It includes a number of names that are alarmingly difficult to pronounce.
Right. Right. Yeah, Isaiah is going to be a very difficult book for me to read.
So we're all going to work together on the names.
Right. might have to have a lesson on pronunciation of names or words in Isaiah.
Right. That's where you know, there, because all right, so the Old Testament or the First Testament was written in Hebrew. But then it got translated into Greek, all right? And so there are some Bibles
Right.
that are based off of the Greek version, all right? So I don't know if you remember back when we were like in high school and college, there was a Bible that came out, the New English Bible. There should be one down here. All right, the New English Bible is a British translation from the Greek. Oh, that's right. So,
There isn't.
So the Hebrew Bible is the Tanakh is Hebrew.
oh yeah, I knew I had one.
Tanakh is Hebrew. The Old Testament was Greek.
Uh-huh.
And what was the
Septuagint
was
is the name for the
Greek translation.
Greek translation.
translation? Oh, okay.
Yeah,
And the tradition, not that it's true, so you don't have to tell me it's not true, is that.
What are you looking at me for?
That there was a large, and this is not a tradition, this is history, there was a large Jewish population in Alexandria in Egypt. And they wanted, and they didn't speak Hebrew, so they wanted a Greek Bible, and they got 7 people from each of the 12 tribes. So they call them the 70, even though that math doesn't quite work out. And supposedly, each one of those 70 translated the Bible from Hebrew into Greek, and they were identical. That's the tradition. Obviously, it wasn't real. But Septuagint means 70.
Hmm.
And so that's the Greek translation.
I didn't realize that. That's how the name said.
Well, if we're gonna get into this, what book in the New Testament was originally written in Hebrew?
Hebrews.
Nope,
Oh.
nope.
All of the books in the New
No,
Testament.
they're written in Greek. The New Testament was written in Greek.
Right.
Not every book. The
But-
the oldest,
I know which one it is, Harold.
Matthew. There's the earliest copies of Matthew were written in Hebrew.
But that's not the first book, is it?
I didn't say first, I said what book was written originally in Hebrew.
And it was Hebrew. Right.
No, it was Matthew.
No, Matthew was written in Hebrew.
Okay. Learn something.
Right. Yes, yes.
And that does make,
Yeah.
his target audience were the Jewish people.
Yeah.
So that makes sense.
So one of the things that that Golden Gay,
Oh, the author, yeah.
the
Golden
author,
Gate. Yeah,
the
this guy.
author of our book was that prophets didn't fulfill their ministry by writing books, okay? They were out on the stump, on the tree stump, okay? They fulfilled their ministry by going to public places such as the temple or the courtyards in Jerusalem and talking to anyone who would listen about their message, giving their message. And so we see that a lot of what Isaiah is out there preaching, just like Jesus traveling around the country, that a lot of the messages are going to be repeated. There will be certain themes throughout that will be repeated because that's what happened. You go here and you speak, you go here and you speak, and you're saying things along the same themes. And then they're written down. Someone says, oh, gotta write this down. And so when you're writing it down, then we're going to see that repetition of various themes as we read through. So it's a collection of all kinds of separate messages kind of strung together, just kind of like Jesus and his parables are. And the author of Golden Gate gives an example. He says that of this repetition, he says that he gave a story of a little Christian preacher who was out there kind of giving the message and preaching. He says, you're preaching about the same thing all the time. His congregation told him, he says, well, I'll stop preaching about the same thing when you learn when I'm teaching what this one message is, then I'll start preaching about something else when you carry out and show me that you've learned this one message. So, again, they say that, chapters 1 through 39 contain, large sections of Isaiah warning about the judgment on Israel, culminating at the end of the chapter with the fall of Jerusalem and the exile of the people to Babylon. And then we have the second set of 40 on, that seems to be written, there seems to be time travel happening here. You know, that where Isaiah 39 talks about exile and something's coming in the future, that 40 through 55 talk about exile as something that happened a long time ago. And so it's different ideas about, you know, what could have caused that, who would have written that, who did the writing of that. And so we'll be kind of exploring that as we start studying Isaiah, and we'll start with Isaiah 1 next week.